Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Inquirer Live at Gameday Central alongside Jeff McLane. I am Olivia Reiner. We are coming at you live from the U.S. Bank Stadium press box, getting set for the Eagles matchup against the Minnesota Vikings. Jeff, how you doing?
I am doing well, Olivia. It's good to be back here at U.S. Bank Stadium where the Eagles had one of their highest of highs in winning a Super Bowl, Super Bowl 52. I recall sitting in this open-air press box just after the final gun went off. The ball hit the ground in the end zone right down there in the far corner. Tom Brady's Hail Mary. Someone, I assume it was an Eagles fan, lit a large spliff, and all of us got second-degree high before we read our game stories. So that was enjoyable. And then a few years later, the Eagles came here and lost 38-20. So some highs, some lows, and some more than just a high, certain types of other highs for the Eagles and for those of us here in the beat wing of covering the Eagles. But anyway, yeah, it's good to be back here. Sorry for that long prelude.
A lot of memories for the Eagles here in the stadium, and a lot of former teammates on the opposite sideline in Carson Wentz, expected to start for the Eagles for the second time. Start against the Eagles for a second time in his career. And then Isaiah Rodgers, of course, the one that got away, who's having a lot of success right now as a starting cornerback for the Minnesota Vikings. But before we get into any of that, I just want to remind all of you, you can be a part of our conversation. Head on over to inquirer.com/Eagles Game Day. If you're not already over there, you can leave us a question, a comment. We will try to get to some of those during our show today. Also, if you're over on social media, anywhere you're watching, X, Facebook, YouTube, drop us a comment down in the chat and we'll try to talk about it during our show today. All right, Jeff, let's get into it. This has been a tough stretch for the Eagles. They have lost 2 consecutive games for the first time since 2023. However, they've had a little bit of extra time, a mini bye, so to speak, coming off of the Thursday night loss to the New York Giants. A little bit of extra time has done the Eagles a lot of good in some recent years. You think back to the 2021 season, you think back to the 2024 season, just last year when the Eagles were coming off of an early bye week, and Nick Sirianni, in partnership with some of the players too, going back to a more run-focused approach, very reminiscent of the approach that the Eagles took back in 2021 when they got back to the ground game, made that a core part of their offense. That might be, I'm curious to see, Jeff, and curious to get your thoughts, if that is the right way to go for this Eagles offense. It has been a real tough time on the ground to start this season for Saquon Barkley. Eagles offensive line has been banged up, as we know. Lane Johnson dealing with injury throughout the year. We've also got Landon Dickerson coming back for this game after dealing with an ankle injury, sitting out last week with an ankle injury. How do you envision the run game going forward, especially going up against a Vikings team that has struggled a little bit against the run this season?
Yeah, I don't know if it's as simple as just like, hey, run the ball and then it's going to work. They've tried to run the ball this season, and it has, for the most part, not worked. Now, we've seen glimpses of the Eagles having some success early in games the last 2 weeks. Then they kind of got away from the rush for whatever reason. I think in the loss to the Broncos, I think Kevin Patullo, as the play caller, saw that there were opportunities to throw the ball downfield, but then, when they needed to kind of ice the game away on the ground in the 4-minute offense, they just weren't able to do that. And I think some of that is on him for getting away from it. Now, the Giants game, they got behind pretty early and then just were kind of chasing points at that point, so they had to draw Jalen Hurts a fair amount. But look, I mean, this may be the answer right here against a team, as you mentioned, that has struggled against defending the run. I think they've allowed around 132 yards per game, rushing yards per game on the ground. So maybe there's an opportunity there. Getting Landon Dickerson back should help, but even when he was in the lineup, clearly less than 100% Dickerson has not really been playing, up to his norm. And that's been an issue, especially Cam Jurgens coming off the back surgery. He has said that he's not 100% as well. Lane Johnson, after the Giants, and asked about the run game, has said it become too predictable, suggesting outside runs. There's a lot more that goes into it than just running inside versus running outside. But I think there is some truth to the fact that when the Eagles get in certain personnel packages, when they line up in certain formations, defenses are keying in on stopping Saquon Barkley. But look, if this offense needs to function close to the way it has in previous seasons, especially last season, and as you mentioned, when we saw after that bye last year, when they decided, hey, we are going to lean heavily on Barkley and running behind really good offensive line, that should be the answer for them. They just got to get it going. They have to, they have to do a better job up front, but they also have to do a better job in terms of play calling. And one thing that I suggested on my podcast just this past week, they have to run Jalen Hurts more. Now, I don't know what's going on there. He's only rushing in terms of designed runs, maybe one time a game. That's 2 per game less than normal. That may not sound like a lot, but that's 40% less. And I think you just need to do it a few times to keep defenses honest. That creates space for Saquon Barkley. And there are times, obviously, when Jalen Hurts does run it, he picks up a lot of yards. I think he's averaging 7.3 yards, aside from the one loss that he had against the Giants, which was more on him than the actual blocking. That really kind of sets up the run offense when Jalen Hurts is involved.
In talking to Jordan Mailata this week, he says if the Eagles can get the run game going, if they can establish the run, that will fix everything with this offense, which is a pretty bold statement. But if you think about it, really, if the run game isn't strong, if defenses don't respect the run, they're certainly not going to load up the box as much and drop safeties down. And if that is the case, then it's going to be harder in the passing game. And this has been a pretty one-dimensional passing game for the Eagles. They seldom attack the intermediate middle of the field. Jalen Hurts has just 17 attempts this season, 10 completions between 10 and 19 yards, which accounts for just 9.9% of his pass attempts, according to Pro Football Focus. That ranks last in the league. It's pretty staggering to think about that, especially when you consider that is an area of the field where A.J. Brown has had a tremendous amount of success throughout his career. Even last season, you look back, that depth, that area of the field accounted for 33% of his targets. This year, it is just 18.6%. Jeff, why isn't Jalen Hurts utilizing the intermediate middle of the field in the passing game? And how can the Eagles get that area going again, going up against the Vikings secondary that has had a lot of success this season, particularly because of the really strong play of Isaiah Rodgers?
Well, I think there's several factors, as we talked about, just as there are many factors in why the Eagles aren't running the ball that well. It's not like Hurts can't do it. I think he averages previous 4 seasons, it was like 18.4% of his throws came in the intermediate area of the field, which is below the average of the league, which is usually around 20 to 22%. But for it to be more than half of what it normally is alarming. He's only thrown 17 pass attempts there. That's to me shocking when you think about it. Now, if you watch the games, you kind of understand it because you've seen it. I think some of it is that Jalen is the type of quarterback where he's going to err on the side of caution, and that's important. He doesn't turn the ball over. He's only thrown 1 interception this season, but I think that makes him a little too cautious in throwing those types of passes, which require very precise accuracy. There's tight windows in there. You have to be able to see the field, something that he has struggled with at times because of his height and various other factors. He's just, he's sometimes just a click too late. And when he's a click too late, he's speeding up the process as he's going through his reads. And I think that makes him, off in terms of the rhythm in the drop back game. So there are various factors that have led to that. If you look at, you mentioned A.J. Brown, he's just not running as many deep cuts or deep ends or dagger routes and dig routes. And so that kind of falls more on the coaching staff. They need to do a better job of getting the intermediate game going. But if you watch the film week in and week out, Jalen Hurts is passing up opportunities to throw on routes where guys were schemed open. And that's an issue, and I think increasingly so these last couple of games.
I want to quickly flip it over to the defense because there's a few reports out there right now from NFL Network, ESPN, and this is something that we have discussed throughout the week, that Brandon Graham is strongly mulling coming out of retirement to join this Eagles edge rushers core and help essentially in the aftermath of Zadarius Smith's surprise retirement earlier this week. We've talked about throughout the week what the Eagles could potentially do in an effort to bolster that position, whether that is looking to outside help, whether that's looking to internal help. And then, of course, there is the option of going back to potentially Brandon Graham, which sounds like is potentially now on the table. Yeah. Jeff, what do you think of this potential decision for Graham and how he might fit in this defense if he decides to come back and play?
Yeah, I mean, all true that he's considering this, and I don't think it's a surprise. He has a podcast now that he does for our friends over at PHLY and kind of danced around the issue. But, from what I understand, it was something certainly he's considering the Eagles are open to. He's got to ramp up. That takes a little bit of process if he wants to return. I don't think it's going to be that large of a role. But I imagine if he does come back, it'll be, as like the third or fourth guy. I mean, BG probably still may come in and automatically be one of the better guys in terms of setting the edge at that spot. I think Nolan Smith has certainly stepped into the shoes in that regard, and that's probably the area in which he thrives the most. But, Smith should be back sometime after the bye in week 9. But with the retirement of Zadarius Smith, and then you have injuries, and, Joshua Uche and Aziz Ojolari have been fine. Jalix Hunt, I think you're asking a lot out of the second-year kid to go in there and be the number 1 guy with Nolan Smith out, and even the number 2 guy, in fact. And this has been an area of concern, I think, all since the beginning of the offseason. And we've talked about this, and I've been a little surprised about how Howie Roseman has handled it. I think it's just kind of a wait-and-see approach. Now, look, in his defense, he didn't foresee these injuries coming. But, with Graham, as long as he can just step in and slip into the role, obviously we know what kind of respect he commands in the locker room. That could help the defense as well. I don't think it's a panicky move, but it does kind of suggest maybe that type of feeling, within the Eagles organization if it does end up happening.
One of the internal moves we had discussed throughout the week was potentially moving Jahad Campbell to the edge and having Nakobe Dean start at inside linebacker. Campbell has some experience playing on the edge, both in this defense in select packages and also in college at Alabama. I would imagine, Jeff, that this pretty much, if this were to happen, and given the fact that if Graham were to come aboard and then Nolan Smith comes back in a couple weeks from injured reserve after the bye week, that this would all but rule that potential move out.
Yeah, and honestly, maybe here and there they would have Campbell rush from the edge just to switch things up, and you'll see him there at times when they have the overload. That one inside linebacker spot. Zach Braun will end up there sometimes on the edge. It's not technically a pass rush. You may end up rushing in that circumstance, but to have him just line up in a kind of like pin your ears back at the wide spot and rush, here and there. Hey, look, I mean, I think this was an area that probably he struggled at in college when he faced really big tackles, and you face big athletic tackle every week in the NFL. And I just don't know that long term if that's where they want him to be. And I think just putting him there now maybe too much on top of what he's already have to do at a position which there's a lot to learn at inside linebacker. But I could see maybe, here and there, maybe it would give them an opportunity to get Nakobe Dean on the field.
Well, the Eagles defense will be going up against a familiar face in Carson Wentz. As I mentioned at the top of the show, for a second time in his career, he'll be playing against the Eagles. Jeff, I would imagine you were there for that first game. You can think back to it. It was not a very good game for Carson Wentz. He took a whole bunch of sacks. I believe nine sacks in that game. And he has been taking a whole bunch of sacks so far in his Minnesota Vikings career. He has made 3 starts as J.J. McCarthy is dealing with an ankle injury, and he has taken 12 sacks in 3 combined games. So perhaps there will be some opportunities for the Eagles pass rush to get home. I know that the Vikings offensive line is getting a little bit healthier, but as we've already discussed, this has been a pretty lackluster pass rush for the Eagles so far this season. They have just a 3.9 sack rate, which is 28th in the league. What is the key, Jeff, to containing Wentz and limiting him as a passer in today's game?
Take away his first reads. I mean, I think it's more on the secondary than it really is the pass rush. Yeah, you want those guys to get home within 3 seconds, but if they can't, which is more often than not, and we've seen that this season, you have to take away Wentz's first read. And that's, essentially kind of what they did when they saw him all the way back in 2022 and down there in Washington. And, he tends to hold the ball long. He tends to kind of play hero ball occasionally. He'll kind of avoid an initial rusher, and then all of a sudden he'll kind of lose track of where he is, and then he'll get hit again. And that's when the fumbles happen. That's when the sacks happen. But that being said, Wentz can still make a lot of elite throws. And, when you have Justin Jefferson on the other end of those attempted throws, a lot can go well. And I think that's going to be the number one concern for this defense. They just have to make sure they take away Jefferson whenever he's the first read, and I'm sure they're going to be clouding coverage towards him. I don't know. Quinyon Mitchell's going to play. We'll see if he follows him the whole entire time. Jordan Addison's a very good receiver on the other side, and we all know what's going on with the Eagles at the other cornerback spot. But Wentz has some weapons here, and if he's given time, he will make the Eagles pay.
Let's talk about that CB2 spot, because that weakness right now is going to be amplified in this game, particularly because Isaiah Rodgers is going to be lining up for the Minnesota Vikings. He is the one that got away for this Eagles defense, just simply because it has been such a struggle to pin down the starter at that second cornerback spot opposite Mitchell. It has been Ringo at times. It has been Adoree Jackson at others. It seems, based on what Vic Fangio had told us earlier in the week, that they are likely going to go with Jackson at that starting role. After you think back what happened in the Giants game when Keely Ringo started in the game, and then after just a few drives, he was benched and Jackson went in, and then Quinyon Mitchell went down with the hamstring injury, so they had to put Keely Ringo back in, and it was really just a nightmare in coverage for the Eagles defense. What do the Eagles do right now about that second cornerback spot? Is this an area where Howie Roseman needs to go out before the trade deadline and acquire someone, or do you just hope that someone finally stabilizes and can hold down that role?
Yeah, I would say, edge rusher is probably more likely than cornerback. It's harder to come in at that spot knowing everything you have to learn in terms of Vic Fangio's schemes and his coverages, and whereas like edge rusher, I mean, there's stuff to learn, but you can just pin your ears back and rush and defend the run. There's a lot less to have to learn. That doesn't mean that Howie won't do it. I just think it's harder to kind of implement a cornerback than it is an edge rusher. But if that's the case, then it's probably going to be Adoree Jackson from here on out. I don't say that definitively because now we've seen them go back and forth. But I thought Keely's performance against the Giants was so poor against really not what you would call an elite receiving crop of guys there in New York that you wonder where his confidence is. And Adoree, he plays off a lot. He's not the greatest tackler. He's not. He's going to give you problems here and there, but he still can. He's still a savvy guy. He still can kind of keep things in front of him. And with Quinyon and Cooper DeJean and whatever Vic Fangio can do to help him, it might be enough, and they'll just have to kind of scrape by. Every team's got a weakness, and right now that is one of the Eagles' main weaknesses.
Mm-hmm. Now, I want to kind of flip it to Brian Flores in this defense, and they are kind of good at everything that the Eagles are bad at handling when it comes to the blitz and exotic pressure looks, just generally speaking. They incorporate a lot of simulated pressures in the way that they rush the passer, but they also play a lot of zone coverage. And as we know, the Eagles love man coverage. They love when A.J. Brown is matched up one-on-one outside the numbers against a cornerback, and 9 times out of 10, Jalen Hurts is going to be looking for A.J. Brown in those situations. Eagles haven't seen a lot of that, and they probably aren't going to see a lot of that in today's game. Vikings deploy primarily zone coverage, and I thought this was an interesting stat from Next Gen Stats. They say that Jalen Hurts is averaging 3.16 seconds to throw when facing zone coverage this season, which is the longest in the NFL. Not a great look for Jalen Hurts. So what is the key to both handling the blitz or simulated pressures and also improving against zone coverage?
Yeah, so obviously, every defense is going to play more zone than man, but it's just what percentage, and the Vikings percentage is 77. It's like among the highest in the league. So, and then they play a lot of 2 high safety shells. So you'll see a lot of cover 2, you'll see a lot of cover 6, and obviously that takes away the deep end, which is where the Eagles kind of have always thrived at. That's kind of been the passing game, drop back passing game for them to some extent, because Jalen throws a very good deep ball. And A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith are as good as anybody in getting separation down the field. That's why we haven't seen much of the intermediate game throughout Jalen Hurts' career, and obviously something that he doesn't do as well. But yeah, to beat zone, I mean, you have to throw in layers. You have to have good route concepts against to get zone beaters for your receivers to get open, and that's going to be a test here for them. The other one, as you mentioned, is just handling the blitz or the simulated pressures. I think Jalen's gotten better at handling the blitz. The areas in which he has struggled just recently is because, teams will just change it up on them. And what they'll do is they'll simulate 6-man pressures or 7-man pressures, and they'll just send various groupings of 3 or 4-man rushes and then drop guys in the zone coverages, and that's thrown him off. Not only him, the protection as well, and that's a whole other issue that we could get into in terms of like what's going on with the pass protection calls before the snap. That's on Jalen. Ultimately, Cam Jurgens involved in that. All the offensive linemen and everybody, for that matter, is on that. But it's just kind of not been very, very crisp and clean. And that's been a big issue for this team. And if Brian Flores can confuse Jalen Hurts, it could be a long night. Now, that being said, there are opportunities against those blitzes. There are opportunities against those disguises that happen late into the clock. But the problem is the Eagles take so long getting to the clock that it really allows the Vikings to do what they want, to dictate what they want to do in terms of the pre-snap disguise. So it could be a slog out here, and we'll get to the final score soon. But I think that's one of the reasons why I don't think the Eagles will score a lot of points here tonight.
I want to take this question from Garrett over on YouTube. He says, what do the Eagles need to do to bounce back after this 2-game skid? I think that is a huge part of this game for this Eagles offense, is going to be effectively handling the blitz and communicating at the line of scrimmage to sort out the pressure that the Vikings are going to attempt to bring. That's going to be a big part of it. I think overall, just generally, just staying out of those 3rd and long situations that the Eagles have not been able to solve. It has been a death sentence for the Eagles when they are in those 3rd and long situations, and it was a perfect example of it against the Giants last Thursday when they were in those situations 7 times and they converted a 3rd and long once. And it ended up being on a touchdown drive. And then when you think about how they got into those 3rd and long situations, 4 of the 6 that they did not convert, on 2nd down, there was a negative rushing play of some kind. So getting that efficiency back, that execution back in the run game is going to be critical. Jeff, are there any other keys you think for the Eagles? I know we've talked about a lot, but really to bounce back in this game.
Well, I think you've raised a good point in terms of the run game, and what we may see more of. And I know it's not something they do a lot of or do very well, is the under center game. And, you can't just be under center and run the ball. You have to come out maybe and short throw out of it, naked bootleg, reset the pocket for Jalen, get some easy throws going, and get the Vikings thinking that, okay, this is something that they may do on occasion when they are under center. I know it's not a world that Jalen Hurts technically wants to live in, but when you get your running back going downhill from under center, and you allow your O-lineman to kind of get a little bit of a push based upon that, it can really help your run game on 1st and 2nd down. So, if they had, just my sense is I feel like that's something that, because then what that does is it opens up the play action game. And we saw that last year, that when they turned things around, that's kind of one of the areas that they leaned into. Yeah, Jalen's going to be in shotgun most of the time, and they're going to have the pistol formation as well. But the under center game, I think, is something that the offensive line has been pushing for, and I think that they're going to try and get it going here. I know that the efficiency numbers aren't good, but I still feel like that's something that they can kind of turn around, and they have an opportunity against this defense.
Well, speaking of the run game, Jeff, we've discussed plenty of players throughout our show. If there is one that you're really intrigued to see how they're going to perform in today's game, who would it be?
Will Shipley. No, I'm kidding.
Well, he's active.
Well, and he may be ahead of A.J. Dillon based upon that fumble. A.J. Dillon is inactive, right? I just saw that. So, yeah, so Will Shipley is an interesting name. He is an interesting name, because he's someone that the Eagles do like a lot, and they had him ahead of A.J. Dillon during the offseason, during training camp, and it was only really when he got hurt early in the season that A.J. Dillon moved ahead of him. But no, my player to watch is Saquon Barkley. Right? Right. I mean, if you look at the numbers, yards before contact, it suggests that Barkley isn't the problem in the run game. Now, there are times, I think, when you watch the film, and I think he'd be the first to say it, he's not hitting certain holes. But by and large, it's been tough sledding for him. And I think you just got to get Barkley going a little bit here and there. And there are times, and you hear them say, and I think this is what kind of losing teams say, but they're like, oh, we're this close to breaking one. And that was a big part of what you saw last year when the Eagles were lacking in explosive plays in the pass game. You could get the explosive plays from the run game. And how many times did Saquon Barkley take one to the house? But those are momentum changers, and they're huge plays in the game. And I think there will be opportunities for him to do that here on this turf here, looking at it now. get Barkley going. He's kind of the key to what almost everything the Eagles do offensively in terms of turning this around.
I'm going with a player on defense for my player to watch, Jalen Hurts. I'm going to be keying in on him. Jeff, as you already mentioned, it has been a quiet start to the season for Mr. Hunt, the Eagles' third rounder out of Houston Christian in 2024. If we all remember correctly, this is a converted safety coming out of Cornell. So this is not a player who has a ton of experience lining up on the edge and rushing the passer. Took him some time last season to get comfortable in the defense and to get accustomed to the NFL game. And we saw that particularly when his snaps increased following injuries to Brandon Graham, Bryce Huff, as the season continued in the second half. So perhaps it's going to take him a little bit of time to get going. Unfortunately, Jeff, as you mentioned, for the Eagles, they've put him in this situation where they need him to get going right now. And they've got Nolan Smith out injured, Zadarius Smith now retired, and who knows, potentially now Brandon Graham coming back into the fold. We'll see what happens there. But right now in today's game, there is no Graham, there is no Smith, there is no Zadarius Smith as well. And they're going to need someone to step up. And I think it is time for Jalen Hurts. He has a 14% pressure rate, which ranks second among the Eagles edge rushers. However, he has yet to have a sack. So we'll see if he is able to get his first one of the season today. All right, Jeff, crystal ball is out. What's your final score prediction for today's game?
Well, you may find my score familiar. We'll get to yours in a second, but I'm going with the Eagles, 19-17. As I mentioned earlier, I think it's going to be hard to score points against this defense, and conversely, I think it's going to be the same for the Vikings with Carson Wentz, and as poorly as the Eagles defense played against the Giants, I think losing Jalen Carter or not having him for the game, and then losing Quinyon Mitchell, and you're already down Nolan Smith, and the whole Keely Ringo situation just kind of compounded everything, and then the fact that the offense wasn't productive, and of course the fourth quarter against the Broncos was bad, but I trust Uncle Vic a little more to get this back on track. I think we'll have something for Carson Wentz in terms of making him hold the ball, and thus we'll see some sacks. So it's, as I wrote in my prediction, I think it's hard for me to kind of pick the Vikings because I'm just not a believer sometimes in what Carson Wentz can do over the course of a long game, because turnovers are always happening and hero ball is always happening. And I feel like I like the matchup there. And I do, I don't think the offense is going to figure it all out in this game, but I do think that they'll come out with purpose and maybe be able to get some things going on the ground that'll help them kind of eke out this victory here. But I don't feel very confident about it. I will say that.
It would be really, 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 really bad if the Eagles lost their third straight game to Carson Wentz. And in my prediction, I have that exact thing happening. I have the Vikings winning 19-17, same scores, Jeff, different outcome for the Eagles. And I primarily, Jeff, for the reason that you said toward the end of your very fabulous soliloquy was that I just don't think that the Eagles offense is going to put it all together and figure out everything that ails them in one fell swoop in today's game. I don't know what has gone on with this offense for the first 6 games of the season, but even in those wins, it didn't look right. So I'm not convinced that they're going to be able to fix everything today. I think it's going to be a low-scoring game simply because I have more faith in this defense to correct course, given the fact that they're getting Quinyon Mitchell back, they're getting Jalen Carter back. Those are arguably their two most important players on that defense that they played without for the majority of the game against the Giants. On offense, though, I don't know. There's something. I don't know how the run game is magically going to fix itself, given the fact that Landon Dickerson has been playing through so many different things. Who knows exactly how he is feeling. He's active in today's game. He's going to play. But is he 100% still? Probably not. We'll find out if they're able to rebound and just execute better. That is the bottom line, is the execution, at least in the Eagles locker room. That is the word they are using, execution. That's what needs to be fixed. But is it just execution? Is it also a schematic issue that the Eagles are facing right now? And we'll find out. We'll see if they're able to execute the play calls better, and we'll see if the play calls are enough to right the ship against this Vikings team. But I'm not convinced right now. So they're going to have to prove it to me in order for me to give them the benefit of the doubt going forward. All right, everyone, that is going to do it for us today. Thank you so much for joining us at Inquirer Live at Gameday Central. Just a reminder, once again, you can head on over to Inquirer.com/Eagles Game Day. We will be chatting with you in real time throughout the game. So we look forward to seeing you over there in just a little bit.
And if you want even more Eagles insight, please check out my podcast, Uncovering the Birds, where I take you behind the scenes each week with exclusive reporting, interviews, and everything you might have missed about the Birds. You can listen to Uncover the Birds at Inquirer.com/podcasts or wherever you listen to your podcasts.
Once again, that is all for us, everyone. Thanks again for joining us, and we'll see you next time.